What's up guys, Coach Tom here for Thibarmy. We're going to bring you a series of videos now exclusive to the Patreon, where we're going to go through a load of exercise tutorials for you guys, either based on exercises that we see a lot of people doing wrong, that we can fix quite easily to help you get more out of those exercises, or assistance movements that we like to include in people's programming that maybe aren't very common or a lot of people won't know exist, that we want to kind of introduce and get more people using. So the first exercise that we're going to cover today and go over is the Seated Sumo Deadlift. Now this isn't one that you see performed by very many people, but it's probably the best assistance exercise for anyone who's looking to either improve the start position of their sumo deadlift, or for somebody who's looking to do a deadlift variation that can really help their glute strength, especially in the bottom part of the lift. So this is usually one that is best used when you're starting to learn the sumo deadlift, because the sumo deadlift is actually a lot more technical than the conventional deadlift in terms of the start position. It is very difficult to wedge down into position properly in a sumo deadlift. It requires a lot more mobility than a conventional deadlift, which is why a lot of people have to work their stance out over time, because their adductors and so on need to get used to being under load at those kind of lengths, and they need to work on their hip external rotation to get wider. So what the Seated Sumo Deadlift can do is, with whatever stance they're in, it can teach them how to properly wedge into the bar and to load their posterior chain more during the start of the movement. A lot of people will end up with their shoulders forward over the bar and essentially try to squat the weight up too much, which is not what we're looking to do. So the Seated Sumo Deadlift is almost like the box squat equivalent for the deadlift here, in that we're teaching the individual how to sit back and get the posterior chain loaded into the movement, and also teach them how to load the hips and get the knees open wide and take the slack out of the bar in that more difficult position. Now when we go through this, we're going to show you exactly how to set it up, but basically all you're going to need is something like a box or a bench that's roughly the same height that your hips are going to be at when you set up in your sumo deadlift. Okay, so we've got Naomi here who's going to demonstrate the Seated Sumo Deadlift for us in a moment. Remember, when we set this up, we want a box or a bench that's going to be as similar to height, so that when you sat on it, your hips are as far off the floor as they're going to be when you set up for your regular sumo deadlift. So that way we can mimic the start position much better. We can get into the most similar position possible when we're doing this exercise as an assistance exercise, either to make our start position and starting strength better, or simply to improve our glute strength, but they're usually going to feed into one another anyway. So with the bar set up, Naomi's going to get into what is her normal deadlift stance, okay? Now the first part is to have your shins roughly vertical, so you want to put your feet far enough in front of you that your knee is basically directly over your heel. Now, from this position, what Naomi's going to do, she's going to kind of set up like she normally would for a deadlift. She's going to twist her elbows back, get her upper back tight, but then she's going to hip hinge and lift the bar off the floor only by increasing her torso angle there. And she's going to hold and down. So that's the first part there of the Seated Sumo Deadlift. There's an initial lift off the floor, which is done entirely through the hips. And then we're going to get to about mid-shin usually when we do that. Now what this does is it shifts Naomi's center of gravity and her center of mass back behind the bar. Now what this is going to mean is then when she goes to lift the bar up, because her center of gravity is behind that of the bar, all of the load is pretty much going to be on her posterior chain, especially the glutes. Now what this means now is that when she goes to drive up, we need to make sure that we don't also tip forward and allow her center of gravity to come back this way, because then we're going to completely unload the glutes. So when you do the full lift, what you're going to do is do that initial lift and pause, and then when you basically go to stand up, and that's honestly the best way to cue it, is just stand up with the bar. We don't want to see Naomi's shoulders tip forward, and we don't want to see the bar move down in space before it comes up. The bar should only move up after that initial pause. So she's going to wedge in, hold for 1, 2, and then up. Just do a couple more for me. That's it. So again, wedge in, knees open up nice and wide. 1, 2, drive up. Perfect, that's it. And the last one. Okay, upper back tight, wedge in, 1, 2, drive up, and down. Perfect. So that's exactly what we want to see when we perform the seated sumo. We want to see that initial torso angle rise up as the bar comes off the floor. That's also our center of gravity going back behind the bar and preloading the glutes. And then when the lifter goes to stand up, the bar, the shoulder and the hip should all just rise up together. Now what we normally see, and then we're just going to demonstrate this now, is if it's too heavily weighted or we don't really know how to use the glutes in that position, what will happen is the lifter will tip forward first, their center of gravity will come forward to match back up with the bar, and then they'll stand up. So if you can just show us 2 reps what that looks like, and then tip forward, there. And then it almost kind of turns back into a Romanian deadlift, but you started from a weird position. So there, the bar drops then as the hips shoot up, and she comes in. So if you see that start to happen, that means that you probably loaded it too high. You're not going to need a lot of weight on this movement at all to get some good benefits out of it, especially for your glute strength. And you want to keep the reps pretty low, probably in like the 3 to 6 range.